The Barons of Memphis, Marnie Gellhorn.
Chapter 14. It Must Be Graceland. July 2021. The defendant's main defense lawyer was Lee Filderman. While not classically handsome in a movie star sense, the slim and trim 53-year-old attorney quickly became the favorite of female spectators and court TV alike. The charismatic and charming member of the defense team had the same kind of sex appeal as Yul Brynner in his appearance in The King and I. The press liked him because he didn't shy away from the controversy engendered by his client, but embraced it. He always had a witty quote at the ready. The fact that most of the comments had nothing to do with the case often escaped the reporters until after Lee and his client were already gone. Assisting in the case, due to his client's insistence, was Kelly Darrow. Kelly and Hunter went back to high school. Even though Kelly specialized in the area of law that most lay people call ambulance chasing, Hunter knew that his expertise in handling medical testimony would come in handy. While Lee was initially annoyed at having his legal team dictated to him, he readily came to appreciate Kelly's assistance once the medical aspects of the case became clear. He spent much of his time, too much of it, he thought, irritated, interviewing the many people who came forward to serve as character witnesses for his client. Some of them were obviously looking for their own 15 minutes of fame and couldn't be trusted on the witness stand. Others, like Michelle Gates, probably meant well, but were too obviously unstable or unreliable to be used. There were a few like Bradley Faulkner, who just seemed like stand-up guys who wanted to help a friend. Privately, Lee thought many of them should be a bit more careful who they were friends with. Lee wasn't overly enamored of his client, but as a criminal defender, that was often the case. He tried not to let Hunter get under his skin, but sometimes he just had to delegate some of the client interviews to his associates. He would send two of his junior associates on the 3-hour one-way trip to Nashville to continue interviewing Hunter. They would record the sessions so that Lee could ensure he had absolutely all the information he needed to formulate Hunter's defense. He'd spoken to Hunter several times to ask for him to consent to a transfer to Regional 1 Hospital, but Hunter had refused even after Kelly explained the disadvantage it placed on the defense team. It couldn't be done remotely because of Hunter's unfortunate tendencies to wander off topic. He also basically needed on-site supervision at all times to prevent him from incriminating himself and to try to keep him off social media. It wasn't until Judge Kraft remanded Hunter to the prison wing of Memphis' trauma hospital that Hunter's defense lawyers could really get to work. For every minor celebrity clamoring to be a character witness, the prosecutor's office was fielding a deluge of calls by people who were most definitely not fans of Hunter Barron. One of these potential witnesses was a former ex-girlfriend, Katie Auckland, who had a fairly compelling tale to tell. I'd actually been the one to refer her to the prosecutor's office after an interview with one of Hunter's inner circle led me to a woman named Heather Mentons. Despite the cute name, Heather Mentons was a serious woman, a mental health therapist specializing in the treatment of PTSD. Due to privacy laws, she was unable to speak to me about Hunter Barron or anything she knew about him, but shortly after speaking with her, I received a call from Miss Auckland. She seemed eager to speak to me, stating that it was something she needed to do to get her life back. The trial had already started when the prosecutor decided that they needed to depose Miss Auckland as witness. She was added to the witness list, and the defense team was notified that secondary counsel in the prosecutor's office would be performing depositions in their office. It was kind of a dirty trick to play, but since the defense had an entire team of attorneys, they couldn't really complain. They would send some junior attorney to ask some questions, but it was doubtful that Ms. Auckland really had anything useful to add anyway. The prosecutor's office was surprised when Lee Filderman, lead counsel for the defense, came into the office. Katie Auckland said she'd been in a whirlwind relationship with Hunter that had resulted in him moving in just weeks after they met after a flood had damaged his apartment, or so he had told her. This temporary arrangement had taken on a threatening tone just weeks after he moved in. One night after work, when they were watching a movie with her two cats, Cora and Quentin Thomas, sleeping on her legs, Hunter had abruptly told her that no one should have two cats. She admitted that she had erupted with more anger than she had expected, but stated that she realized at that moment that he was attempting to see if he could control and manipulate her. She yelled at him, and he was forced to leave and stay at a friend's house for the night. She was still angry the next day when he came over with flowers in hand, but he made her feel that she was grossly overreacting. Katie relented and let him back in, and things seemed to go back to normal. Then, one night, about a week later, when she was working late, she came home to find that Cora was missing. The story Hunter told seemed suspicious. He claimed that he'd opened the door and Cora had run out. But Cora was a former shelter cat, and she hid from noises. She usually hid under the bed if someone was at the door, so it didn't seem to make sense. But Hunter had brought one of his mother's employees, Billy Clements, to help look for Cora, so she felt guilty and uncharitable for her suspicions. Later, when she realized the apartment story had been a lie and that the entire relationship had been based on a series of lies, deceptions, and manipulations, she asked him to leave. He'd refused and laughed in her face before sitting back on her couch and ignoring her. She tried calling the police, but when they arrived, Hunter had recognized the cop as one of his drinking buddies from Neil's music room. He made a couple of little woman jokes and assured the police officer that it was all a misunderstanding. The cop hadn't even asked Katie what she thought. She'd ended up having to fake a girl's weekend, waiting until Hunter left her house, and then called a 1-hour locksmith. She put all of his accumulated belongings, which included an incredible amount of hoarded materials, in her garage for him to pick up. Despite that, he'd call ranting and raving, threatening her for stealing his stuff. He harassed her friends and hounded her at her job. She worked as an insurance agent, and he came into the office demanding to speak with her boss about the thief he had working for him. He'd also made a series of online Yelp reviews that mentioned her by name and accused her of criminal activity. Thankfully, her boss was more irritated by Hunter's intrusion than anything else, but it was humiliating all the same. Katie was a strong and powerful witness, and Lee hated to imagine her on the stand, in the middle of the trial, telling the entire courtroom about an ex-boyfriend harming her pet. The prosecutor asked, "And of the two cats, why do you think it was Cora that disappeared? You said the other cat was pretty friendly." Katie didn't mince words. Because Quentin was a pure breed, Cora was from the pound, and Hunter's a snob. She also testified about Hunter's later attempts to break into her house, and how he threatened her mentally disabled brother to try to force him to let him in. He'd come back 3 months later while she was on a business trip and had terrorized her brother so severely he'd had an episode and had to be sedated and hospitalized. Hunter had told her brother, Arthur, "If you don't open that door right now and give me that stupid fucking cat, Quentin, I'll crush your skull just like I'm going to do that bitch's cat." Lee Filderman had been preparing to interrogate Katie Auckland. He knew she would be a dangerous witness if they got her on the stand. But he found some interesting documents during discovery, and he was ready to grill her over some of her statements. He was hoping if he came at her aggressively enough, she'd be hesitant to testify in open court. As he leaned over to get some papers out of his briefcase, he was gripped by a sudden nausea and a tearing pain that shot through his right side. He was sweating profusely and almost doubled over in pain. The court reporter at the depositions took one look at his chalk white face and ordered the office secretaries to call 911. An urgent message was sent to the courthouse where Carrie Bryant currently had the first preliminary witness on the stand, including the paramedic and the emergency room staff that had treated Mr. Barron after his injury. A recess was declared so that the paramedics could evaluate Lee Filderman and evaluate him. Despite his obvious pain and distress, Lee managed to send a message to ask for an emergency continuance, which was denied just as he collapsed on the conference room floor. After the recess, after a sidebar with both sides, the judge had ruled that Kelly Darrow and Filderman's two junior associates, Keisha Mack and Quinn Kendricks, were more than adequately prepared to take over the defense. By that time, Lee Filderman had already been wheeled into surgery at Regional 1 for a ruptured appendix. But all of that happened later, after the opening statements.
This episode was narrated by Zeporiah Gray of RMP Studios in Memphis, Tennessee.